Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are in this world, in this virtual world. I'm David Mancuso with Mancuso Show Management, and we're back with another fun interview. Our DIY festival, our Create DIY festival, is premiering. So this is what we call our crossover event, and we're having a lot of fun doing this. Before I get started, I don't know if anyone has ever set up at a quilt festival in a large convention center, but getting things done by the electricians is always a difficult task. And back in 2015, I got a call that we needed electric supply way on the other end of the exhibit hall where we have the exhibits and not the vendors. Well, the electricians were very kind of not cooperative on doing this. So the lady that I'm going to interview next actually brought in her own car batteries for her exhibit. I couldn't understand what this was all about until I went back there and seen this fabulous exhibit. So we're going to introduce you in a little bit to Susan Else, and she does quilted sculpture. Susan's work has developed in tandem with the art quilt movement, but she is one of the few artists making figurative sculptures that often incorporates sound, light, and movement. Susan says she uses cloth, an alternative universe that is whimsical and edgy, modern, surreal, and engaging all at once. Each of her works tells a story, but it's all open to interpretation. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. It's one of the few virtues of this time is this the way that we are all connected in a way that we weren't all connected a year ago. And it's been a privilege to be part of that.
So tell me, where are you broadcasting from?
I'm on the coast of California in lockdown, in one of those counties that, has a stay-at-home order. I love it here. I was born in Sacramento and grew up there, which is in the center of California, and then moved to the coast to go to college. And like many other people, I never left because it's a small version of paradise here, although it has its issues. But
Wow.
I've been here for many, many years.
Yeah. So you're native to California.
Yes, indeed.
Right. Okay. That sometimes I find it interesting that a lot of people over the years that I've met in the Bay Area tend to be more native to California as opposed to the Los Angeles area, where I think a lot of more people move to.
My parents came here after the war. They were both New Englanders, and they came west when the war was over. My dad found a job in Sacramento, and that's what brought them out.
So how old were you when you were first introduced to textiles or sewing or your art or?
I grew up in a family of artists. My dad was a professor at Sac State, and my mom was a sculptor, and they were both professionals. They sold their work, they exhibited their work. My brother's a filmmaker, my sister-in-law is a ceramic sculptor. So I grew up surrounded by the arts, but I was dead set against ever being an artist myself. The blank canvas scared me. And in hindsight, of course, I had to do something with all those genes. And at a very young age, I started to sew. And my mother sewed, like many, many women at that point. She taught me how to sew. But I sort of taught myself too. I came in at about age 5 from outside where I'd been playing. And I had these little primitive doll clothes in my hand. And she looked at me, she said, "Did you make those?" And I said, "Well, yeah." So when I was a teenager, I actually took my first fiber arts class at the Mendocino Arts Center and became a weaver when I was a young adult, and finally had to go back to work full time and put my looms away. And then when I was pregnant with my first kid, a friend said, you want to take a quilting class? I want to make a baby quilt. And I said, I want to make a baby quilt too. Of course, it took me till she was 7 to finish the thing. But, and for many years I was a traditional quilter, and I said, I do not, there's this thing called the art quilt movement. That is not me. I don't want to do that. Um, but, the dark side took me eventually. And I started making what I consider to be art quilts. This was in the probably early 90s. And then a friend of mine, Michael McNamara, was making three-dimensional figures, and that inspired me to say, I could make some of those. And I did, and they ended up on my design wall, and I started playing with them. And I realized I could make, I had never been a narrative artist. I was very geometric and, you know, playing with fabric and color, but not trying to tell a story. And suddenly, with these figures, I was telling stories, and they were primitive figures, but they read emotionally like they were believable. They could put their arms around each other and they could dance. And then there were some frames that I had made for an abstract piece, and those ended up around the figures. And suddenly there I had these little dioramas that were wall pieces, and the work, it came off the wall eventually and became fully three-dimensional. But that's in a nutshell kind of how it worked. Within about 3 years, I went from making a huge Lone Star with all the points interacting in the middle to making pieces that were dimensional and narrative. Not realistic. I never say my work is realistic.
Really
I say believable in another universe.
Well, let's put up some images, and we'll take a look at some of this great stuff, because I just totally remember when I went to the back of the hall, and I said, oh my gosh, this is what they wanted the battery. This is what they wanted the electric for. And I said, this is fabulous. So this is really, you pretty much told us why you make sculpture as opposed to flat quilts. Yeah. I can see how it progressed over the years.
And also my mom was a sculptor. So
right.
I had that modeling in my head that a lot of people who come to this from a different background, they come from a painting background or they come from a sewing background, the image of art in their head is two-dimensional. But I think for all those years, I had this image of art in my head that had both options. And so it's not that surprising that I would work three-dimensionally. But I also think I really got my dad's color sense and his use of color. So I think I'm kind of this funny blend of the two of them.
Sorry. The color is fabulous on them. And so when did you actually do your first sculpture? Was that in the 90s?
Let's see. I believe it was 1998. I don't know what possessed me. I had been making what I considered flat art quilts, although I look at them now and, they were contemporary fabrics in geometric patterns, very bright, very graphic. But they didn't have much looseness to them. And then for some reason, I think I just got bored with the flat surface, and I started making these they were essentially like couch cushions, right? They were little shapes with dimension, and I was sewing them onto the flat background. I think we maybe don't want to be going through all the images quite yet, do we?
Not quite yet. We could slow them down a little bit for you.
Images are projecting,
right. So how has this work changed over time for you?
Well, I mean, there's the obvious thing in that it started out as flat quilts with elements sewn on, and then I had to figure out how to stabilize the back so that the whole thing didn't get wonky when you put three-dimensional elements on the front of it. And then the scenes gradually evolved into something 360 degrees. So they came off the wall, although I still do make wall pieces. They're always dimensional wall pieces, they're at least about 3 inches deep.
Right.
The other thing that happened was that when I was first doing this work, I was kind of on a mission to show that you could make anything out of quilting. Right? It was that fervor of the new convert that, I can make a rock wall I can make acrobats. I can make this, that, and the other thing. And people could walk into my studio and during open studios and say, what is it actually made of? And I'd say, walk up and look at it closely. It's all cloth. And so that was the the beginning was like, look what you can actually do in cloth. And of course, people have been doing that with cloth for thousands of years. We wear three-dimensional, I always say that people are just armatures for three-dimensional cloth sculpture, right? Because we wear clothes and we are three-dimensional. And so we have this cloth surface on us. But the other thing that happened when I first started to work was when I first started telling stories is that I realized I was funny, and I'm not a laugh-a-minute kind of person. I'd never had a reputation as being really funny, but there was something about the figures and their kind of wacky, primitive, other off-planet qualities, and I would make them do things, and they were funny. So there was that element, and then I started using that in a kind of wry way. And over the last 15 years, the work has become more political, just like the country. The work has, as issues have come up, there's a lot of things that I feel a need to express. And I try not to get too didactic and, you have to listen to my point of view. I try to keep it open-ended, but I want the work to raise questions. I want people to, the thing about textile art is it makes people engage with it a long time because it's so detailed and the surface is so complicated. So you have to come up and really spend some time. I also want people to look at my work and think about it. What's going on here? What did she mean? What's going to happen to that figure? So
they definitely bring on an emotional effect,
right.
which is one of the things that I think surprised me the most when I seen the exhibit, and so what I mean, so I know you're getting into motorized. We'll cover the motorized in a moment, but people always want to know what's in them. I mean, is there wire? I mean, how do you get these things to stand?
If we could go to let's just go through the first two photos first, so you can see what the work looks like, aside from looking behind me on the Zoom screen. Okay, so this is a piece called Wrong Universe. It's part of a 10-part circus that I made. A lot of it is mechanized, some of it's not. This is one of the pieces that's not, but you can see it's fully three-dimensional. It's suspended from the ceiling. But there's a twist here. It's not just trapeze artists at a circus, right? Because it's called Wrong Universe. Because have you ever had that feeling when you jump off the trapeze and your partner is supposed to catch you, and instead there's a big parrot there, and suddenly you've got two universes colliding? So that's what the circus is a metaphor for all sorts of parts of life, and that's what this piece is about. If you go to the next slide, you can see there the detail in how it's made. Most of my work, I make a fabric collage, and then I cut it up to make the body parts. I quilt each body part or each aspect of whatever the scene is, and then sew it all together. And then I either stuff it or I sew it by hand over a hard armature. So these are the teddy bear method kind of work. And later on, I'll show you some of the hard armature pieces. But anyway, that's what the work looks like and a little bit about how it's made. If you go to the next slide, there's my studio. And it's facing, those doors that are behind me. It's from those doors looking in. It's not nearly as big as it looks. But you can see I've got a sewing machine there behind the figure. That's the pink figure. Right behind that is my old Bernina. And there's a design wall there. It's on your left, and that has some not work in progress, but just some work on it. And there's my work bulletin board and my fabric stash. You can see on the right there. Really, that is my fabric stash. That one cabinet on the right. With you can see the color organization. So it's set up a lot like a normal sewing space. However, if you go to the next photo and you look down at my work table, I've arranged a bunch of things that I actually use in my work. There's fabric on the top. I just kind of put those out there. They were scraps from a piece I was working on. And I would be collaging those together with invisible zigzag and then cutting them up to cover whatever to make a skin for whatever my object was. Then if you look, you can see the corner of the Bernina in the bottom corner there, that white thing projecting into the photo. You can see the cutting board. You can see the cutters, the rotary cutters, marking pencils, pins, those little pallets that you use for machine quilting to make it flow easily. Very important tool is the picker outer of the thread. What's that called? That thing at the front by the scissors. The thing the seam undoer, because that's a really crucial seam ripper. It's the most important tool I have because I make mistakes all the time and I have to take the seams out. Then there's if you see, there's a big X-Acto knife there at the bottom, kind of at the bottom of the screen. And under that are some products. There's a plastic board that's corrugated, and there's a foam board that's about 1/2 inch thick, and you can cut both of those with the X-Acto knife. And then there's a bunch of fiberfill right between the fabric and those little pieces of board. Behind that, there are plastic bones, because I'm the person who made all those funny skeleton figures. And so when I don't put real bones. There was a rumor going around at Quilt National that I put real bones in my work, and I don't. Okay, so those are plastic bones. There's a drill back there because I often have to drill into the bones to keep, so that I can kind of sew through the bones with a big doll making needle. But a lot of it is what you would use. It's thread and pins and needles and a Bernina, plus these other funny things. So it's a funny amalgam of sculpture, and there's wire there too. Right below the drill, there's armature wire, because sometimes I need to make things stand up in the world. Okay, so that's that. That's kind of how it works. We could go on to some of the work itself if you want, David, or do you have other questions?
I'm telling you, I'm mesmerized now.
Okay, roll it. Let's go to the next image.
Okay.
This is a piece I did in 2019 for a medical center in California. It's 4 feet wide, almost 4 feet tall. It's 5 feet wide, 4 feet tall, and about 2 feet deep. And this hospital is it's a safety net hospital, and they have a lot of different communities that they serve. And they wanted a piece of artwork that would reach all the communities. So they have a lot of single parents, and this was going to go in the maternity ward. They have a lot of senior shut-ins. They have multi-generational families. They have disabled people. You can see the gal in the wheelchair in the entrance. I wanted to have the medical presence represented in this. You can see the ambulance and the medics and the guy having the heart attack. There's a little corner market on the right-hand lower side. And then there's a homeless guy right outside the laundromat. But I tried to give everybody in this something. So the homeless guy, he's sitting on his backpack and he's got his dog. There's a lady washing her clothes in the laundromat. There's a hipster with a bicycle on the wall, because the nurse said, everybody lives cheek by jowl in Silicon Valley, and we got to have a hipster in this apartment complex. So we could go to the next slide, which is a detail. And this is my version that life is it's a big funny mess. It's a big ball of wax. So here's a single mom. And I think it's Saturday because she's not at work. And there's her kid. That's their bedroom in their little studio apartment. It's a mess, but they're having a good time. And, the rubber duck's on the floor and the towels are on the floor, and you can kind of see into the bathroom a little bit. And, but she's sailing that baby around, and there's some fun posters on the wall, and there's a bottle that's rolled under the crib. So, and then there's the air conditioning ductwork on top, because that's the third floor. And if you go to the next slide, here's a detail of the homeless guy sitting outside the laundromat. And he's got his pit bull, right? That's the dog you get when you're homeless and you go to the shelter, or you have a friend who has a litter. And that's who you have, who is your companion and also protects you in the world. So there were a lot of homeless people who were served by this hospital, and they really wanted something that would engage all the people who were going to see it. So this is the sort of, and this is all that teddy bear method. This is all, make it, quilt it, sew it, stuff it. Figures this size, which are only about 9 inches tall, I don't quilt because the surface becomes too stiff. But so that's some of the kind of work I make. And if you go to the next slide, this was on the ad for this talk. It's my picture and them. This is called Forever Yours. And it's part of the same idea, that life is full of joy and wonderful moments and festive color. And it's also, we're constantly in the presence of things that are scary and terrible, right? So this is Forever Yours. And it's a sarcastic kind of a title, right? Because they're having this tender moment. And yet, you can't take it with you. And I did this piece, I believe, in about 2010. And it was, I had wanted to make a skeleton for a long time. I had made a single skeleton, then I made this couple, then I made a little family. I've made a dog skeleton. For part of the circus, there's a tattooed lady who's a skeleton with tattoos all over the bones. So skeletons have become my way of kind of incorporating that human moment, that gesture that's so sweet, the benign part of life, with the idea that can turn on a dime. And we can't really control what is going to, look at this year, right? Who knew 2020 was going to be the way it is? So I always feel like life is this, as I say, a big ball of wax. And I try to merge all the things in a single image so that people, don't quite know where they are. They get engaged in the beautiful surface and the quilt and the patterning and the fabric. If we go to the detail, you can see what the surface of this looks like. Can you see the quilting in there and the collaging? Those are all different fabrics, starting with the top of the head. That all is, there's a circle and a circle and a circle, and then you got the rest of the skin, and there's embroidery on the teeth, and it really engages people. They really want to look at it for a long time. And I hope it makes them think about, what the ambiguous message is that's being presented. I was very shocked when people started buying this as an anniversary card. And then I thought, well, yeah, I'm forever yours, no matter what.
You know what it reminds me of a little bit is there's a famous excavation in Pompeii, right, of the two skeletons, and talk about a life-changing event when Vesuvius buried them. And are you familiar with the excavation of the?
Oh,
there were a couple embracing, and they were just covered with the.
Yeah, because life, that's life. But that doesn't negate the fact that life is wonderful and fantastic and tender and gorgeous, right? It's the fact that we have to balance all of it. So if you go on, in 2010, I started making a circus. And this is not actually the first piece I motorized, but it is motorized. And we're going to show a video later that shows this going round and round and up and down. But one of the things I want you to notice about it is that in addition to being motorized and having lights and audio and flashing neon sign, there's also a twist. And people walk up to it and they're so mesmerized by the fact that it moves and lights up that it takes them a minute to realize that the ponies are all riding the people. And then So that I very rarely do just straight ahead representation of something. I mean, because my people are purple. My people are made of these wild, wonderful fabrics. So they have a certain unreality anyway. And then I try to push it just enough. If you go to the detail on this, I think we've got a detail. Yeah, there's a zebra riding one of the people. And I think the zebra has a brass ring in his hand. I modeled this on the boardwalk near where I live in Santa Cruz, because we've got a great old carousel down there. I went down, took pictures, and this is not the first piece I electrified. I had done a series of teapots that had scenes inside them. And when people walked by the teapot, they would say, "Oh, cool teapot," and they wouldn't look inside. So I started using rope light on the inside of the teapot rim it was all driven by the need to tell the story. I wanted people to look in the teapot. I didn't want them to just think it was a teapot with nothing else. I wanted to bring them over to it and make them peer in. And so if the thing has a shaft of light coming out from it, then they come and look. So that's what started the technology journey for me, was the need to make the story worthwhile and believable. And also because, oh my gosh, I could. I live near Silicon Valley. There are engineers here. My husband is an amazing sort of carpenter and problem solver and machine figure outer. And so the mechanized pieces are almost all collaborations with either a sound engineer or a light engineer or somebody who knows about motors or how to make things, how to make things work, the sort of maker community. And I'm in the right place for that. So of course,
you're not the motor mechanic, but you pretty much have it all covered.
No, no. My mother could do that. My mother was, I've done power tools once in my life, and it's when I took a class on how to make art for Burning Man. Not because I want to ever go to Burning Man. I don't like sand and I don't like heat, but I wanted to
California.
But I wanted to make pieces that lit up and moved. So I had to find out what was out there, and I did use power tools for that. And it was to make the prototype for this carousel. And then, my husband and I had to work on it. Mostly him had to work on it to actually get it to work. I got the proof of concept in the class and an idea of what was possible out there. I think there's another motorized piece if you go to the next one. Yeah, this is like a big Chinese lantern. There is a big circus tent. It's about as big as the one that's behind me. That's a different one. And it's got a lamp, a light bulb inside it, and a reflective floor. And the reflective floor spins. It's a turntable. And then there are silhouettes that cast shadows. If you go to the detail of this, that's the next image. See how there's a pattern of red images, but then there's shadows overlaid on that. So the red images are all the benign parts of the circus, and the shadows are all the freaks. I went into photos from the turn of the century, found a lot of photos of the giant and the midget and the four-legged gal and the human pretzel and the human skeleton, all those people that, were the basis of the old-fashioned circus. And because the circus has this gritty underside. It's like that big ball of wax. It's got these marvelous horse dancers and clowns and festive, fun stuff. But it also has these people they found a community in the circus, but they were also exploited by the circus, all these people who were different. And so I've got the shadows interact with the red stable images on the surface of the tent. The shadows move around the tent. And so that was, it was another reason to have a motor, right? I don't ever have a motor just to have a motor, and I don't ever have lights just to have lights. It's always to say something. So this is mesmerizing. People just stand there, watch the shadows go around and round and round. So I feel like I'm doing all the talking.
Oh, well, you're actually doing a bit. You answered several of my questions without me having to answer them. That's the best part, you know. So I mean, I have a question. I'm sure our audience would like to know. Do you teach, or have you considered teaching this?
I taught for quite a number of years, and I did a lot of it. I'm pretty good at it. It takes a whole lot of energy, and the way that quilt classes are set up is you get a day if you're lucky, 2 days if you're really lucky. If you maybe go to some kind of retreat, you might get 5 days. And people who look at my work and say, I want to do that, 5 days is just scratching the surface. Plus, I was having to schlep all over the country with all the things. You can't just do a supply list and know that people are going to come with the right things. I'd have a supply list that would have a bunch of metal nuts, right? That you're going to use those as weight to keep the tree you make standing upright because it goes in the bottom. And you have a knitting needle that goes up through the tree. But how do you tell people that they need one knitting needle, and it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be functional, and a box of metal screw nuts and fiberfill, and it's just, so I was bringing all the weird supplies I was bringing with me. So I finally just got to the point where I hit Medicare, and I said, you know what? I don't need to do this anymore. And I went back to the studio, and I really concentrated on that. I've also been on the board of the Studio Art Quilt Associates for the last 6 years, and that's taken a lot of my time too. So,
Which we know, right? We love to work with Sakura, and so it's always a lot of fun. Another question that's coming up is: have you used any other medium on this? Do you paint on these at all? Do you watercolor on these? Dye on them?
when I was first starting out, I ran through the gamut of surface design techniques. I had dye and I had paint, and I did a lot of that. I'm part of a group that does a lot of that. But eventually I got rid of my dyes and I kept my paints, because occasionally I do want to really make a piece of fabric do something specific. So I will take a commercial piece of fabric, a batik or whatever, and I will add patterning to it with paint occasionally. But there was a time when I just had to say, okay, this takes thousands of hours. And if I'm trying to do surface design as well as make these sculptures, I'm never going to get anything done. And there are lots of people who make hand-dyed fabric that's wonderful. So I take advantage of that. I use other people's hand dyes, and I use all my favorite commercial fabrics. But there's, if you look at the pieces behind me, it's almost all commercial fabric of one sort or another. And a lot of it I bought at Pacific International Quilt Festival.
Good to know. Is all of the quilting done by machine, or you do any hand quilt? All done by machine?
Yes, because there are thousands of hand stitches in every piece. Once an item is three-dimensional, you cannot put it under the machine anymore. So if you have a multifaceted piece, you've got to sew it and I don't believe in glue. I worked in a museum for a while, and I really trust my own stitches way more than I trust adhesives. So I hand sew if I'm sewing onto a plastic bone, that's all got to be tightened up by hand and little darts taken to make it conform. So there's like the walls on that house behind me, that bone house behind me, those are all hand sewn together. They're not glued together, they're hand sewn. We actually have some pictures of that coming up.
Well, we also have you want to show more pictures, or we also have some video from you.
Why don't we show, let's show the video. And then if we want to go to if you have a what's next question, then the picture will work for that.
Well, let's take a look at the video.
to the next slide, I've started making a series of domestic objects made of bones. It's called Heirlooms. The whole series is called Heirlooms. It's an offshoot of the skeleton series. But I'm at my stage of life, I think a lot about ancestors and where I come from. And I think a lot about the heirloom objects that I live with, that people, generations have lived with. And also, of course, about mortality. So if you go to the detail on this, the detail really shows this piece is really about getting comfy with mortality and with the past, right? Because here are all these beautiful bones that make, that's a pelvis on the top turned upside down, and those are shoulder blades, right, that make the stairs, and they're arm bones that make the side of the door. But inside there's this cozy little chair and a cozy little light, and you could sit down and read your book. And I sort of feel like, when you live, you have to come to terms with both the past, our ancestors, of people who've done stuff before we have, and also just with the idea that death is inevitable and part of life. So that's what's next. I've made a chair, a bowl, a platter, a garden, and I want to make a little bureau and a bed, all with bones as the structure.
It's a lot of fun. Your enthusiasm is contagious, and I greatly appreciate you being here and doing this for us, and I know the audience is loving this, and so I guess unless I could talk you, how about even doing a lecture? Maybe you should do lectures instead.
Oh, I do lectures.
Oh, you
yes,
do? Okay, all right.
Lectures, presentations are still my thing, and if I get a request from a really exotic foreign port of call, I will think about designing a class there. But
we could travel again. Right.
Yeah, when we could travel again, I would do that. But yeah, and I do presentations, and that's fine because I don't have to schlep anything except my images for presentation. Especially, well, there's always the work to show. I don't have a trunk show; I have an armoire show.
Right. Tractor trailer, the way it's going. So again, we thank you very much.
It's great to be here.
Anybody, I actually do have one more question for you. If somebody, is your work for sale in any gallery, or do people contact you for commissions?
Well, for permissions, obviously, you need to contact me. I have a website. It's myname.com, susanelse.com. And currently that's where the work is for sale. There are prices on everything on the website. I also do a lot of commission work for people who have, want something like XYZ, but it's, that one's sold or it's too big or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I sell my work out of national traveling shows, so that I participate in. So, but I don't have a gallery right now. No.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I think
Thank you.
I think we've had a great time. I have.
It's been fun.
It has been fun. Thank you.
Thanks, David.